Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we're going to start the sixth maim of the hemshekh, which is we explained ad nauseum.
What?
How to the point of nausea, of frustration, and distress, that the maim is split up into three sections. Section A is the first two maimorim, Yom Rosh Hashanah Chayin Miyimayim. The second section, Section B, is the next three maimorim, Shuvi Yisrael, Lulav Arav Yom Shnei Atzeres. And now Hashem went into the third and final section of the hemshekh, which are these last three maimorim. Now, it's also important to remember how the previous maimor was from Shnei Atzeres, and it was on Simchas Torah, a very eventful Simchas Torah in Lubavitch. It's worth looking up the sichos and hearing all the things that Rabbi Rashab said. It was also when Hichotzu was said for the first time. The second time being on Shabbos Pashas Noach. This is Shabbos Pashas Bereshis, so it's in between the two two times when Heichotzu was said, which also adds a very interesting context to it. Now, I mentioned last time how, and I haven't seen the Ksav Yad to know why this is the way it is. If you look in the old version of Ranat, the edition that was printed in 1984, 1991, the Maim of Bereshit starts with Bir Inyan, and then it goes into the pasuk, into the pasuk Eileh tel d'shamayim va'aretz. Whilst in this edition they put the words Bir Inyan shit mitzarachim tzarklovim masha kosuv at the end of Yom Shmini Atzeres. I haven't seen the Ksav Yad. I don't know what the issue is, but it's not really hugely makes a difference in sort of just it's an interesting change, but obviously it doesn't change the pshat. So the purpose now, the last three maimorim, is to explain the shit of imay midas harachamim. But what you're going to find at the beginning of this maimah, it's going to actually spend quite a while adding another reason or another impact of creating midas hadin. Till now we said creating midas hadin has two, pretty the same negative impact. Whether you take the first pshat of Shuvi Yisrael, that the Eibishter is going to be extremely exacting on people. That's what Midas Hadin means, to be very strict and exacting with people. Or you take the pshat that Midas Hadin means the Eibishter is going to be very absent and be behalem behester. In both instances, it will be very difficult for people to maintain the intense avodas Hashem that will be required of them under such circumstances, and that's why there needs to be the shit of imay midas harachamim. That's how we've explained it till now. So one of the reasons to be combine the midas harachamim with the midas hadin is because of eino olam yichul iskayim. Meaning, when we say that eino olam yichul iskayim, mean that people would struggle to maintain that intensity of avodah. The beginning of this mind is going to give another reason why it would have been too much for Midas Hadin, and therefore it's going to explain what would be the a sort of an impact of Midas Hadin. I know we're supposed to be going into saying Ubinyan shit of Midas Harachim Midas Hadin. We're going into Midas Harachim. We're going to have to wait a while before we get back to get into the Midas Harachimim, because it's going to give another description of the impact of Midas Hadin, and that is if there would have been a Midas Hadin, a creation with Midas Hadin, then there would have been a greater kiyum, a greater there'd been a greater acceptance or a facilitation of klippa and sitra achra, of ra, bad things, evil things. And he's going to explain how that fits inside according to the first pirush of Shuvi Yisrael, and Sai according to the second pirush of Lulav Arav Yom Shmini Atzeres. But the impact of Midas Hadin would have created a greater body of evil and destructive forces, and that's another reason why you want to be mishtatif the Midas Harachamim. Okay, so the main reason we've said why we want to have the shit of Midas Arachimim now is in order that people won't buckle, people won't struggle too much with the workload, the avodah that would be expected of a person in either circumstance, either with too much presence of the Eibishter or too much absence of the Eibishter. We call them Pirushish and Pirusheni. Now we're going to give another reason why it would be a destructive thing to create the world in Midas Adin. And then in the second half of the Maimah, we're going to give a pshat of the shit of Midas Rachmanim. Okay? Now this Maimah actually has quite a lot of technical language. I would say it's not as dense and difficult as Yichayenu Yumayim. I think at the time I told you Yichayenu Yumayim has probably got the most difficult sort of Kabbalah Isius, but here you have a little bit of sort of expecting you to know this, that, and everything about everything. But it's a little bit more explained and expansive, and you need to pay attention and not bluff sich. Don't try and fool yourself that you know things and just go on try to get to the Chassidus. You should know the pshat of what these things are talking about. Okay, so let's get into it. Shabbos Bereshis Ranat. Eileh told us Hashemayim v'ha'aretz b'hiboram b'yom asais havai elikim eretz v'shamayim. This is the pasuk in Pashas Bereshis Omid Ein Aleph. This is the pasuk in Pashas Bereshis in Perik Beis pasuk Dalet, which we've already mentioned this pasuk, because if you remember right at the beginning of the hemshekh when we brought the fact that Olav Machshava Lilu B'Midas Adin, this is what the whole medrash is based on. Where do we know that Hashem wanted to create the world in Midas Adin? It says Bereshis Bar Elikim. Elikim is it shows on Midas Adin, and then it says in Perik Beis pasuk Dalet Eileh tells Hashemayim v'Aretz b'Hiboram b'yom asais Havaya Elikim. Havaya is Midas Arachamim. And so after Hashem wanted to create the world in Midas Adin, he realized the world wouldn't be able to Mikayim Shitu Midas Arachamim, and that's this pasuk. So the whole medrash is miyusud on this pasuk. Now it's going to bring another medrash on this pasuk, a separate medrash. So the Isa al Zeb medrash Rabbah Reishis Perigid Beis. So in the medrash Rabbah, it says as follows: Omer Rabbi Avua Kol Mokim Shenema Eileh Poseles Rishonim Chuli. That's Yudua. Sometimes in the Torah it says Eileh, and sometimes it says Ve'eileh. And Rashi is always quick to point out that Ve'eileh is Lohisif al Rishonim. When it says Ve'eileh, it means the consecutive Vav, meaning that the Vav is saying and, because in truth, in Hebrew, a Vav can mean but. However, so the Ve'eileh could have meant however, as in contrast to what was said before. Or Vav can mean and. Va'ani's philosophy. As for me, however, for me, the Vav is not and me. The Va'ani, or Va'ani's philosophy, is however, as for me. So the Vav is, you might say, what's the of course, Ve'eileh means and. It doesn't always mean, Vav doesn't always have to mean and. So he's madgish. Ve'eileh means Lohisav al Rishonim. When it says Eileh stam, without anything, Eileh, it's meaning that's when it's coming to be mevatel the Rishonim, or to be poistless the Rishonim. What we said until now, so such and such and such and such, and then it gets Eileh. Eileh is a sort of a break. These in fact are the Toledot Shemayim Ba'aretz, and not what we just said now. These things, what we're going to describe now is how it is. That's when it's Eileh without the Vav. So in the case of Perik Beis Pasuk Dalet of Sefer Bereshis, what does it mean when it says Eileh Toledot Shemayim Va'aretz? Zog the Medrash Ma Posal. What was it coming to invalidate? Toyu Vavoihu V'Cheshech. So the beginning says in the pasuk, so Toyu Vavoihu V'Cheshech Hapanei Tohim. Right? So you have three things: Toyu, Vayu, and Cheshech, all seemingly derogatory things. So initially, Bereshis Bar Shemayim Va'aretz. In the beginning, it was tohu v'cheshech. That was the outcome of all of that. So instead, Eileh told us Shemayim v'Aretz b'borim yim asis havaya likemes v'Shemayim. Now we came along and creates the world with Ashvaya and Shittafim Adisar Achamim. And then you have the world as we know it. Okay? That's the Medrash Rabbah in Bereshis. Medrash Rabbah is Pasha Mishpatim. And in Mishpatim, which you can imagine also goes through a whole list of these Eilehs and Ve'eilehs. Isa Gamkin, on a similar line, says a similar thing. Amar Rabbi Avua, Kol Mokim Shnei Eileh Posel Eser Rishonim. Eileh tells the Shemayim v'Aretz b'Hibaram Ma'Posel. So here he says, what was it? It's a bit more detail. Shayabayr Shemayim v'Aretz, able to create the heavens and the earth. Mistakel b'hem. They weren't pleasant, sweet to him. So he returned them to Toyu and Vayu. Came to Rosh Hashanah ba'aretz Eileh. When he saw these Shemayim ba'aretz, the one that were created with Havai and Elikim, they were sweet for him. And Amar Eileh told us. So he said, these ones I've now created, they will have told us. They will have a kiyum. They will have an outcome. There'll be a progeny from that. Lefichach Eileh told us Hashemayim v'Aretz, and that's why it says in the pasuk Eileh without the vav. It's because it's been rejecting the earlier ones. Avle Rishonim lo hayu told us. These ones have told us, but the previous ones don't have any told us. There's no kiyum. Adkan. That's what it says. But I mashkos b'Zoyar Pasha Bereshis Daf Chavdal Tzofim at base. Was it say this Shapirush Shapirush Akol Inyan Echad? So there he says all of these midrashim, they all come together to explain the same thing. The Masha Hayabayna Ilam Machrivan Hainu Eilam. So you're not talking about the world. They created the world, didn't like it, destroyed it, created another world. We're talking about Eilam Ruchniim. This is all being merames, or an indication of Eilam Atoyu. So initially the Eibush created the world, there was Toyu.
Anarchy.
Indeed. And then there was a change of plan. Created with this shit of him, Rachamim, and it was able to be a desired world. Okay? So that's the setup. So we're now going to see what would have been the impact of this world existing had it not been rectified. What would this world look like? What would have been the outcome of such a world? And this is what he's going to explain. And it's going to get a bit technical. It's not going to be as free flowing as the previous two Maimorim, 3 Maimorim. I mean, since Yecheinu Miyamayim, we've had a beautiful, free flowing style that has been very on the point. This mime is a little bit more. You got to work a bit harder. Doesn't do all the work for you, so you have to concentrate. Like structurally, it's a little bit more demanding. So lahavin masha elatel this pasuk rishonim. So let's understand this. What it means when we say that these toldos of Shemayim v'Aretz invalidated or rejected the previous ones. Lefi mashmois hakosuf Bereshis bara likim chuli v'Aretz hoisa toyu chuli. What the impression from the pasuk is from the beginning of the Torah, Bereshis bara likim, and the Aretz was toyu. Nira the lefi shenivra b'shem alikim b'chinas midas adin al kain v'Aretz hoisa toyu. The mashmois is that why was the world toyu v'vayu? It's because it was Bereshis bara likim, because everything was done with midas hadin. Uki yadua. The toyu v'vayu v'cheshech hen gimel klippes hatmeyes v'yini kosam hu mikav hasmoil hainu b'chinas din. So we know that din is the kav hasmoil, something we will meirich about in the Maimon Shuvah Yisrael. Gvura is on the tzad smoil, and so the toyu, vayu, and cheshech are indicators of the Gimel Klippus Atmeis. Okay? So, in the style of Sifri Kabbalah, you can understand how it's in Pnimis HaTorah, how it looks at this pasuk and it says V'aretz Toyu V'voyu V'cheshach Toyu V'cheshach are simonim of Klippa and Klippus Atmeis. And as we're going to see now, also in the Medrash, this already has been articulated in the Medrash, how these are reflections of Klippos. I won't jump ahead, we'll see it in the Medrash now. Uki Yedua Me'inyan Para Adumas. Oh my goodness, what talking about Breishis, now we're going to Para Aduma, Parshas Chukas, but Altzachim, we're going to bring a few things together. Like it's known regarding the Para Aduma. Dubba Para Nirmazu Gamkein Gimel Bechinas the Toyu Vavoyu Vacheshach. Because the Para Aduma also is Meramis. We can use the Para Aduma as an example to understand this, because the Para Aduma also has this correlation with Toyu, Vayu, and Cheshach. Now, how are you going to connect Para Aduma with Toyu, Vayu, and Cheshach? Like this. So in the Psikta Rabasi, the Rav Kana, it says, the Bepara Marumas Daled Malchios. In the pasuk about Para Aduma, it's a remez to the Daled Malchios. So Para is Mitzrayim. Aduma is Bavel, Tmima is Madai, and Ein Mum is Yavan. So the Dalet Malchios, Mitzrayim, Bavel, Madai, and Yavan. Madai is Pras, right? Pras, Persia. Yeah. So you've got Mitzrayim, Bavel, Madai, and Yavan. These are the 4 Dalet Malchios. So in the Medrash, if you look in the Psikta Rabasi, he takes the pasuk and he gives reasons why. Because there's a pasuk, he finds a pasuk somewhere else when he gets to Mitzrayim, which I think talks about an Eileh, doesn't talk about Para. And he finds something about Bavel to do with redness. And Smima, he finds something to do with Modai. And also in Ein Bamum, as we Yavan. So he brings psukim that are like sort of more specifically referring to those places, and then he brings it back to Para Adumas. In this pasuk, Para Aduma, Tmima she'ein bamum, is a remez to the Daled Malchis, which are Klippos, right? So, those are Daled Malchis. That's one medrash. V'chein merumazim b'pasuk v'ha'aretz ha'isa toihu, k'mesha calls a medrash Bereshis Perik Beis. So if you look in the Medrash Rabbah Perik Beis, it takes the pasuk va'aretz ha'isa toihu v'vayu v'cheshech al pnei tahim, and it says toihu ze Bavel, vayu ze Madai, cheshech ze Yavan. It's suitable for Chanukah. Cheshech is Yavan. Okay, so it doesn't mention all 4; it mentions 3 of them. So we know we have a difference between, you have Gimel Klippus Atmeis and you have Klippus Noiga. So there's a difference between the 3 and the 4. But the Poel Toyu V'Cheshach is also on the Malchios. So this is how we're making the connection. If Para Aduma, we have a direct medrash that says it's connected to the Daled Malchios, and the pasuk Ha'isa Toyu V'Cheshach refers to the Gimel Klippus Atmeis and is a remez to the Gimel Golus, yeah, the 3 types of Golus. Then Muvan the Bepara Murumazim Gamkin Agimel Bechinas Toyu V'Cheshach. So you can align the things, right? Because they're of. Yeah, you appreciate how that can be aligned. It's not a direct link. There's no medrash that says the Para Aduma is connected to Toyu V'Cheshach, but you have the 2 midrashim on the pasuk Toyu V'Cheshach and the pasuk on Para Aduma are basically miramis to the same things. So then you can make a triangle and connect them. Now that we've established to an extent that the Para Adum is connected to the Gimel Klippus Atmeis, he explains, why is it that these Gimel Golios, the Gimel Klippus Atmeis, are hinted at in the Para Adum? Is Mishum, the Gimel Klippus Atmeis, Yenikasa mi bechinas Para the Kabilas mismola. Because the Gimel Klippus Atmeis receive their chayis from where? From what we call, from a level called Para. And the Para is makabel from dinim, from smoil. So if you look in the Nevuah of Yechezkel, it talks about the ox, which is a par, is the male version of the cow. Where is it on? In the Merkava, it's mihas smoil, it's on the left. Okay, so we have these themes. We're working on certain thematic consistencies. So if the Gimel Klipsat Meis receive their chayas from smoil, from gvuros, which is something we're going to go into a little bit more detail now, is because the makabel, how a clip is able to be makabel from kedusha. Everything to exist has to be makabel from kedusha. How does it receive it? It receives it through tzimtzum. We know midas adin is midas tzimtzum. So through the obim with tzimtzum beyoser, they're able to also be makabel chayas from it. It's just for their survival. So before we're talking about a tosfos unika, an additional unika, which comes from us intensifying the tzimtzum and making it even more of a helen behester. That's a different, not for now. So structurally, you know where we're at? You understand? Gimel klipsat meyes are makabel their chayas from midas hadin, which is on the smoil, and the part of the shod is on the smoil. So that is our connection with the para adum. Then a para who bechinas klippas noiga. Now the para says is klippas noiga. It's not gimel klippas atmeis. V'zeu the para who par hey. So what's that mean? Par hey. So par is just the male form of para, and you split the word up. Par hey. Par is 280. Gematria 280. And it's the gematria menatzpach. What's menatzpach? Menatzpach are the letters in the Hebrew alphabet that have soifei teves, right? And the mem and the nun. Lange tzadik and lange fe, lange chof. Yeah, menatzpach. So if you add up menatzpach, you'll get 280. The hey, what's hey? Hey hu beginas hey gevuris. Par hey. So hey gevuris. So menatzpach are. I'm gonna think what does a safe teva do? It closes off the word. So in relation to we already know from Lulav Arava the Oisios are a helen v'hester on the Eir. So just like Oisios are a helen v'hester on the Eir, Seifei Teves are even more intense helen v'hester. They're sealed. They end something. They end the hispashtus of the Eir. The context is the end letter, right? They indicate a greater degree of helen v'hester, which comes from the Oisios. And then in addition to that, the par, you have para par hey gevures. So we know that you can look at it. The hey gevures are just like you have in dibur. We explained in dibur you have hey moitzais hapeh. There's 5 points of articulation in the mouth through which the letters are produced. Are kalim for the letters which are produced from the nefesh, as we explained, but they bring about the hischalkus ha'isius. Hischalkus ha'isius is the yeshus ha'isius. So that is what we call the hey gevures. It's also connected to the idea of yud kei vav kei. That yud is chachma, hey is bina, vav is zah, and hey is malchus. So you have this idea of hey. And the hey gevuris of malchus come from the hey gevuris of bina. These are themes that we're going to discuss a bit more when we sort of.
What do we say about menatzpach again?
They are the soifei teves.
And
therefore, just like Oisius in general are a helen v'hester on the oir, the soifei teves are even greater helen v'hester. They indicate a stronger form of concealment of the oir, because they're containing, they're closing off the word,
right.
and they're also in the physical manifestation. They're longer. They're rounder. They're blocked in, right? You have the mem, which is like sort of a closed thing. So it's the idea of being more magvil to a greater extent. So the para, which we said in the Klippas Noiga, is a sort of a product, or is makabel, it's hashpah, in a way which is very, very mitzumtzum, through lots of tzimtzumim. That's basically, that is the point it's trying to make.
Is this para the source of things?
It's meramas on the Gimel Klitzat Meis.
We said that it's
yes, because ultimately, as what we're going to explain is that if you dial up the Midas Hadin to such an extent, like the Eibishter wants to do at the beginning, you just create the world, Bereshis Bara Elokim. You produce Tayil Ve'il and Cheshach. It goes from Klippas Noiga all the way to Gimel Klippas Atmeis, and it gives a Tosfos Oir. It intensifies the Chayas of Klippas, as we're going to say. Give it a chance. There's going to be a lot of loose pieces over here, which hopefully we'll be able to tie together by the end of the show. We're going to get onto the moon on Ein Gimel, and I think that's our ambition will be to get to the top of Ein Gimel today, and make some sense of this. Okay, and then we get on, and then we'll deal with the moon then. The moment we'll deal with the paraduma, the cow. Ready? Mm-hmm. There's no Havana Vasog at the moment. At the moment, we're just giving labels and names to things. You're not the part of your brain at the moment you're supposed to be using is not the part of your brain that's trying to fit all this into any larger picture. Just figure out what the rudimentary points it's making over here, and then we'll be able to use it. But we're going to be engaged in technical terms. We're now at this point. Now we're going to bring a little bit more hasbara. But till now we've just brought technicalities. He hasn't explained anything. He's just described this in this medrash, this in that medrash. We can combine those two madrashim to get an indication of this. We've now brought this idea about the par being Klippas Noiga, par gematria maspach, hegevuris. But in truth, originally I bracketed this whole thing off, the whole thing with the parad, and we're going to bring it back in again a little bit later. You can even think about it outside of the paraduma. I'm not sure how much it's moisif in the flow of things, so you could see it more as a zaitik azach. Okay, so all we've really said is Toil and Voyov Cheshach Gimel Klippas Atmeis, and they get their Yonika from Midas Hadin. Now we're going to continue. In Kedusha, there's also, according to, we're not just talking about Hegevuris of Klippas Noiga, we're talking about Hegevuris in Kedusha, as we've explained at length, that in order for there to be the creation of Eileh Biyah, there has to be the Tzimtzum and the Parsa and the Helen Behester of Malchus Atzilus. That's a Hegevuris. It's in Kedusha, it's not Atzilus. It's a positive thing. Shehein, those Hegevuris of Kedusha, this method and this mode of Helen Behester on the Eir of Atzilus, so there can be the creation of Eileh Biyah, Shein Makeiris Chalkas Aesius. What this does is it creates this multiplicity of Aesius. When our moshel that we're using to describe Malchus Atzilus is Dibur, Malchus Peh, Aesius HaDibur. And just like in our moshel of Aesius HaDibur, you have multiple Aesius. In order to explain something, describe something, articulate something, you have to have a range of contrasting letters to create the sounds that you need to do to create the words, the sentences, and whatever you're trying to communicate. So, in order for there to be his chalkus ha'esius, this range of esius, there needs to be hegevuris. It has to be tzimtzumim. Just like we contrasted between the difference between Eisis HaMachshav and Eisis HaDibur. In Eisis HaMachshav, the Eisis aren't to such an extent divisible. you can think a very broad and complex idea in a much more in a much sort of small amount of time. You don't need to have so many oisius, but to speak, to articulate, you need to have more oisius. And even within speaking oisius, you can have a range. There can be more, there can be less. Oisius are, the more oisius you have, the more ischalkus or oisius you have, right? The more helen behester you have on the oid, right? It's like one of those circuits that the more parts of, the more things you include in the circuit, if you have the same energy going into it, in the same current, then the lights will dim. The more lights you put on, each light will dim, because it's dividing and it's sharing up. So the oir, as it comes to be slabshus in oisius, the more it's chalkas oisius, the oir is going to be dimmed to the point of not just being dimmer. It's going to be changed. Or commission is spoiler ill. So this is like what we explained above in Lulav Arav. The Metzias Hakshamas Oisius Lias Bechinas Yesh Murgash. How do you get to the point where you have discernible letters of speech? So you did Tzimtzum. The Gvuris Davka, we explained that was because of Tzimtzum and you have Tzimtzum. Fishim is Samsim or Eva in a Meir Begil. The Eiris comes in a Derech of Tzimtzum and it can't be Meir Begil. I didn't ask him Oisius Bechinas Yesh Kanal Beirich. We sort of really went at length and we explained that you have in order for there to be Kved Malchus, the Levush of Malchus, the Isis Adibur of Malchus, there has to be Gvuroschi Daberu. There has to be the Tzimtzum Ha'oir. Or K'moikein, Al Yedei Zeh, U'bechinis is Chalkus Ha'Isis. And that's one thing. One thing is to have Hakshamas Ha'Isis, Yeshus Ha'Isis, which does a job of concealing the Oir. And then more than that, you have this Chalkus Ha'Isis. The Oisius then become divided. These two things of having ischalkus and having yeshus come hand in hand. The yeshus who sibas ischalkus. Once there's yeshus or Oisius. Once the Oisius are defined, then they are mechuluk from the other Oisius that are defined. The greater the yeshus, the ischalkus is also greater. And that's why you have a greater degree of ischalkus in oisius hadibur than oisius machshava. Why? Because oisius hadibur are much more beyeshus. Just like we're not talking l'mayla now, begashmius, in a human being. It is a discernible fact that our speech letters are much more material. They become much more materialized than our thought letters, right? To the point where you can be speaking letters and they make sound waves. If you put your hand next to your mouth, you could even feel heat, right? No, not now. They are physical, material things. Your letters of speech, they are a yesh, but your letters of thought are not. I mean, there's mechanics going on in your brain that enable that to happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's not of a comparable level of hakshama than you have in your oisius hadibur. As such, the oisius are less b'ischalkus in oisius hamachshava. But when it comes to oisius hadibur, they come much more b'ischalkus. The more yeshus, the more ischalkus. And the more ischalkus, the more yeshus, the more ischalkus, and the more ischalkus, the more helen behester. The oid is much more, the oid becomes much more concealed in oisius hadibur than they do in oisius hamachshava. And the same thing we're going to say is l'mayla too. The moshel for malchus vatzilus is oisius hadibur, and the hey gvura is comparable to the hey mitois hapeh. What we're trying to say is that there's a process by which the oid of atzilus is concealed through the oisius hadibur of malchus, which we've talked about this barichas, right, till now. It's not saying anything new. This point it's just made is the same point we've already been making. Saying it's slightly different oisius, so but don't get confused. You this nekuda you have already. And like he reminds you, canal, like we said above, being in asvin ravravim asvin zeirin. We talked above about the idea of large letters and small letters. There when we spoke about it before, we talked about asvin ravravin or in bina and asvin zeirin are in malchus. But and we gave the mashal of kel odin, if you remember, that each one is ois, but it's kodel, a whole pasuk of 3-4 words each one. Yeah, and if you remember, kel odin. You can look back as a reference to which page it was. Yeah. But it's bepashtas, like in the Mishnah, you can call it like asvin ravravin. The Gemara asvin zirin. I'm not saying it says this anywhere. I'm saying like as a moshel to understand what that means. That when you have big letters, a big letter means a letter which it can contain a greater degree of oir. So in the Mishnah, the oir, the conceptual ideas of the Mishnah are much more intense. They're all able to be contained in a few letters, a small amount of words. It's what shines more is the concept more than the letters. Once you get to the Gemara and you have the Arichas HaGemara, and it brings out everything that was already in the Mishnah. The whole point of the Gemara is just to tell you what was already there. It's not necessarily a davar chadash. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything new. But you need a lot more letters. Asvin zeirin. The oir is a difference. Rishonim and achronim. So a rishon is usually very, very, very concise. Comes along the achronim, like you're getting used to the Abraham now. Arichas gedola. Whereas Rashi, kurz. Even the Ramban Fiarech compared to something like the Achronim. So when the Oir is much more, if you lived in the time of the Rishonim, you were able to see in those Oisius the Kavanah. By the time it came to Achronim, you weren't able to. So you need to have a lot more Oisius. But in those Oisius there is a tzimtzum of the Oir. Yeah? So the oisius that are more beyeshus are more beischalkus, and therefore are more minor master on the oir. What's the whole point of it all? Why do we have the hegevuris of kedusha, the hegevuris of malchus of atzilus? Because the whole kavana is there should be nivroin bali gvul. Don't forget. Everything we're saying over here is Lafi what? Lafi Pirush Habeis. We're not talking about Lafi Pirush Aleph. We're not talking about the Pirush of Shavi Yisrael. We're talking about the Pirush of Labarav and B'yamash Mini Atzeres. Right? The Midas Hadin is the Pshat, Helam Behesta Ha'ir. We're going to switch, at some point. So just remember where in what context we're talking about over here. This flows very naturally from the previous two Maimorim. Because the Eibishter wanted that to be Nivroim Bali Gvul. Why did the Eibishter want Nivroim Bali Gvul? Ki Atzilus or Likus. Atzilus is still Likus. Ivacha Yuichad V'Yivagamu Ichad. Again, something we were married at the beginning of Lulav Aravim. When we were explaining the Pasuk, Kol HaNikra B'Shmil Ichvedi B'Rosiv Atzasiv Afatzisiv, we explained the difference between Atzilus and Bia. And Atzilus is Eilam Ha'achtus. Atzilus are the spirits of Atzilus are Atzmiim, are Abidveikus, are Ha'ara V'Likus. Just like the Keichs HaNefesh, we gave the Moshel Keichs HaNefesh, which are Nafshiyim. Yeah, gedenkst du? That's why it's so important to make sure you're learning everything together, because everything's drawing on each other. It's building on an argument. So to get from Eilam Atzilus to a state where there will be an Eilamis, and Eilam has a Gashmi, which will be a yesh and a gvul mamish, so the yesh so eisish malim mastir malo eir umischalkim liribu eisius with sirufim. So this is achieved through these eisius, which are in a state of yeshus, and therefore they're a state of ischalkus, and therefore they're able to be malim umastir. Shekol ze geir and bechinas heste umiyata eir yisa. Now yidei zeh naso eilam se bechinas yesh. Yeah. Mamish hachazor of the last two memory. And then it gets fulfilled the whole intention, which was what? The Eibishter wanted to be a kenig. The Eibishter wanted to be a king over everything. Ein melech b'lo yam. And the rule is you can't be a king without people who are bottled to you. There has to be distinct other entities. Then you can be a king over them. And there is, how can anything be mamish separate from the Eibishter? It's not realistic. It's mamish kavyachol, because everything comes from the Eibishter, and this is all tzimtzumein kipshutei, and there's no such thing as something separate from the Eibishter. Eibishter is avaya chod, but they should be nirim lenifrodim. That can be achieved. That they should actually be nifrodim, it's not shaykh. Yesh me'ayin, everything is ultimately dependent on the, he's the metzias amiti. Kol hanimtzoyim nimtzoyim mimenu. Everything comes from him, so it's not shaykh. But sheyu nivroim nirim lenifrodim, as long as their self-perception, and it's more than just a self-perception, there's a certain reality to it that's constructed, then it's shaykhin, that you can have malucha over them. The whole kavanah was a tainuk b'malucha. The Eibush had a tainuk. He wanted to be a king, and that was the motivation for all of this. So through the midas adin, the hey gevuris, till now we were talking about the gevuris of Zah, the kvei malchus yimei gvaschi daber gevuris of Zah. We were talking about the Asius, the yeshus Asius of malchus vatzilus. Now we've added in the hey gevuris, which is not really anything new. It was already there. We just never talked about Hegevuris, but we talked about Hemetzois Apeh. I think we actually made a mention of Hegevuris earlier. It's emphasizing Hegevuris. But it's not saying anything new. It's the same thing that we've been talking about till now. Okay, don't get sidetracked by the slight change of terminology. But through this intensity of all of this amount of tzimtzum and helen behester, again, kivyachol. But the outcome of this unrelenting midas hadin was the production of something which is entirely, or senses itself to be entirely separate from the Eibishter. What is the thing that is entirely separate from the Eibishter? That is what we mean when we say the klippos. So we're using very strong terminology over here. And you know what? Let's just stick with the terminology over here. You might want to keep in the back of your mind that when it says mamish, not always does it mean mamish. It's an emphasis. It's an nothing has to be absolute.
Maybe.
That doesn't have to be absolute. The gamri and mamish, this is what we want to emphasize is, how things are mitzad the hegevuristic tusha is you just produce things that nirim v'nifradim, but they still have bittul, they still have a shaykhus and everything. But if you go too far, if you turn the tap off too much, and you midas hadin really squeezes out all inyan of kedusha, you hide a lakus legamri, then what you end up with is a yesh v'nifrad legamri. These are the klippos. The reishish, you need kosam u'mibechinas hagvuris the malchus. And where does it all begin? Where do the klippos, the origin of this whole notion of there being klippos, it's from these gevuris of malchus. So it all starts in kedusha. Because to get to a state where you can have nivroim, which are nirim ledava nifrod, and they can be bottled to the Eibishter, yeah? And the Eibishter can be a melech, and they can be an am. It's enough, the hegevuris, the kedusha. But that begins a process which goes a little bit, can end up becoming out of control. Kavyachol. Shayidei ze yochel gam klippes neige lekabel chayes mi'akdusha bechinas ha'aram utzumtzemes mi'achirayim de'oisis de malchus. So it starts off with klippes neige. We know the klippa can receive chayes in two ways. One is the ribut tzimtzumim. The more the oid is mitzumtzum, the more it can be misappropriated and misused. It's just like anything. Take a concept, just like an ideology. The more the ideology is going to be watered down, made accessible to the masses, yeah, the further it goes away from its sort of initial formulations and its initial construction within sort of the founding fathers of this ideology, and it gets, it's no longer from the Kli it's from the Kli Sheni and the Kli Shlishi, and different people are communicating these. As soon as you have this hispashtus, right? So you have this chalkus oisius, everything is being articulated more and more and more, and and it's reaching further and further and further. It's possible that things can get misconstrued, misunderstood, used in the wrong way. The very nature of thing, once the oir is behelem vehester legamri, then it's possible for it to be misappropriated. That's the principle. That's the concept. Yeah. In klippes neige itself, there's hegevuris. To be archa shemit to use klippes neige v'ni kosim mashe bobi ribu ishtalshim v'chinas hagvuris to malchus. Since the process by which klippes neige receives its unika is from the gevuris of malchus, the oisis adibur of malchus, the hegevuris of malchus. Lachin yesh b'klippes neige gam kein hegevuris. It repeats itself. It becomes sort of a mode of operation. It's received within a context of the constraints which are imposed upon it by the Hegevuris. So it gets replicated. But when it gets replicated this time, in Klippus Neiga, it's to a far greater extent. Acha Hegevuris the Klippus Neiga, hem Gevuris koshes. The Gevuris, the Hegevuris of Klippus Neiga, we're calling it Hegevuris. The Tzimtzumim of Klippus Neiga, it's not like the marshal I gave of like sort of an ideology that can be abused and misplaced. It's not that it has one stage. It goes off the path in one way. It only goes in one way, and it's limited to that. Once it's already conveyed in an inappropriate way or inaccurate way, and is a false representation of the original idea, it doesn't stop there. It has further permutations and mutations into various other problems. But the problem then is there's even less controls over it. Because the idea was still, whilst it was maybe Ba'alam V'Hester and was a far cry from the original splendor of the idea that was originally articulated, but it was still within the boundaries of the original idea. Now it's gone beyond those boundaries. It doesn't have anything constraining it. So the Gevuris are even more kosher, meaning the way it rejects and it conceals and ignores the original Eir is far greater. Their Gevuris koshes. Ki ischalkus desham hu lachalik mamash. Because when we talk about ischalkus in kedusha, the ischalkus, the Hegevuris of Malchus, is to create a yesh of a nifrat. But lachalik mamash, to disconnect something from its origin, no. But in klipas noiga, once the process reaches klipas noiga, then it's liyes bechinas yeshu period mamish, tura de pruda. Yeah, divided mountains. That's the goal. The gimel klipas atmeis, which is a period mamish. Ki b'kedusha gam la'achar ischalkus mikomok yesh behem bechinas abitul. The ischalkus, there is a product of the hegevuris of Malchus Atzilus. The creation yesh ma'ayin, it creates a yesh taka, but that yesh, it still has a bechinas bitul. Mishakosov etzvah shamayim lecha mishtachavim, that the heavenly hosts still bow down to Hashem. Ukanal b'divnei mazgul v'arova the chol hanivron hein sava ma'ila hein sava mato b'teilim be'emes lo'ir v'chayis l'kim ha'avim v'chayo esam. The reality of everything that exists is that it is bottle. And that's what makes a person into a keli. You can still have actors between the nivroim. That's talking about the malachim. A person is able to have actors. We're not a dava nifrud lagamri. We're able to misachid with other people. Be mavatal ourselves to someone else's ratzin. No. That's possible. When we reach the stage of klipas noiga, this is all in kedusha. We were saying the achdus is still possible in the nivroim. In noiga, bechinas pirdu v'schalkus mamish. In nifradim elikos bechinas yeshus v'hed abitul v'ideiza and bechinas anfim mispardim v'mezeh. Completely separate branches. And again, goes back to the paraduma, but just I bracketed this. So in para par hey, the hey gevuris and gevuris koshes chali. Fine. So al yedei klipas noiga mekablim chayis gam gimel klipas atmeis legamri. The klipas noiga is the mumutza in a way, is the means by which the chayis can reach the gimel klipas atmeis. The noiga umechza teva mechza ra. Noiga is understood to be chetzi, half good, half bad. Avo gimel klipas atmeis himra gomur she'em mem tev klal. Uklolus mitziusam isavusam v'kablus chayusam v'chinas tzimtzum v'hester eir. The tzad kedusha huma shebotul eirin seif. Avokol ma she'enu botul zeu klipa u'mekabel chayis ha'idei she'mesamsim ha'eir v'chayis ad she'nismai kol kach ha'eir v'chayis miyut acha miyut ad she'yoch l'samsim mislavish b'chinas golus teich eisa dova nifrot chuli. Rosh Hashanah. Yeah? So this is the distinction between Tzad Dov Shebikdusha and the thing Shal Klippa. And you know, Klippa is it hasn't got bittul. It's a yesh. It's a Dov Nifrat. And that's all why? Because of the Tzimtzum Ha'oin and the Miyut Ha'oin. T'im ha'ya meir gilu Ha'oin. Because were that to be a gilu Ha'oin, lo ha'ya efsheli is Metzias Hara Klal. This Metzias Hara would not have any room to maneuver. There'd be no space for it. Chem Bad Silus, where Taka there's gilu oir, lo yugur chara, which he teaches out, lo yogu b'magur chara klalu klal. They will not dwell in your dwelling evil at all. Haim lefish b'atzilus me gilu alikus b'teilim lalikus b'tachlis chuli kanal. In atzilus iyu v'chayu ichad iyu v'gamu ichad. It's a ha'ar elikis, it's dovuk. Then there's no room for it. Ulazais eina shaykh shamin ina yeshus v'lei b'chinas ishtalshlus ora klalu klal. The whole process of Ra only begins in Eileh Biyah, because there you already have the impact of the Hegevuris of Kedusha of Atzilus that creates a yesh. It will be a yesh that can be bottled. But then you have Klipas Noiga, and then you have Gimel Klipas Atameis as these Tzimtzumim, as the outcome or the result of these Tzimtzumim takes effect. This is This is the moment of transition from Atzilus to Biyah, where it's possible to have Yeshus, able to have the notion of a Davar Nifrod, even, and then further and further into, as the Tzimtzumim have their impact and their effect, to Klippus Neugen, to Ragom, Moshe Nisamsim, Nisase Oir, Shom Shaykh Inyan Ara. And where the Oir is most concealed, you have an increase in the Metzias of Ra. Like we contrast. In Bria is predominantly good, and it's less consequential, the amount of Ra. By Yitzir already, where there's more Tzimtzum, it's already Mechza, half-half. By the time you hit Asiya, it's Rubeira. So, Rubeira.
It's not completely.
No, Rubeira.
Oh, it's Rubeira.
So, we're going to stop there for this part. It's going to continue and talk about this in the context of Miyat HaYereach. And what it's trying to do is trying to convey a particular point and to understand what is the impact of Midas Din. Till now, we thought the impact of Midas Din would be purely that I would be either Shuva Yisrael, I'm going to be so overwhelmed by the divine presence and the demanding and exacting nature of Hashem in a manner of din and gevuris, that I'm going to first of all behave myself, and then it's going to stimulate in me an abed b'chol na'idecha, coming from the pnimis hanefesh, etzav hanefesh, and that was going to be quite difficult to maintain on a long-term basis. And then I might because if the world was created mitzvah din, I'm going to make a mistake and I could do something wrong. I don't live up to the expectations of mitzvah din. There's no room for teshuvah. I'm going to have to be punished, and it's going to be a downward spiral. But the emphasis was on the problem of creating mitzvah din was it's going to be too overwhelming for my avodas Hashem. And even in the second pshat, it was when we explained at the end. It's going to require an avodas Hashem which is from nisyonis, which taka comes from etzem neshama, and it's going to be a gewaltige uftu, because it's going to be such a helen v'heston elikus, and we're going to be such a yesh b'dov nifrat. We're not going to have any perception of elikus. We're going to need to dig so deep into ourselves and discover midas hanatzchonos, this type of this toikef hanashama, to be able to overcome such an nisayon and still do what Hashem wants. It's going to be really difficult. It's going to be too much. So the Eibishter made it a bit easier. He gave us Torah mitzvahs. Gilo Elikos Torah mitzvahs. That's what we said at the end of Yom HaShmini Atzeres. In this Maimah, we're going to say that it has much bigger, broader implications of creating the Midas Adin. The problems are bigger and wider than that. What we're going to do, what's going to happen by creating the Midas Adin, the outcome of such a thing is proliferation of Ra and Klippa. But when the Eibishter is Be'el and Behester, it's not just, I find it difficult to get up in the morning and learn Chassidus. I find it difficult to concentrate during davening because I don't see any likus. I find it difficult to go out mitzvah when it's raining. So the Helen Behester no likus. Right? I'm not inspired, I'm uninspired. That's not that's one aspect. That was the aspect, but that's what we were talking about till now. Here we're saying that broadly speaking, it's going to not only is it a sort of a private, personal struggle you're going to have to go through. Creating the world midas hadin is going to handicap you to an even greater degree because the world is going to be full of klippa. It's going to the Helen Behester to you on earth. It's one thing, Helen Behester. But if you have to then include within that the problem that you're going to have a lot of klippa, your life is going to become even more difficult. It's going to be the world's going to be totally overrun with klippa to a point where there's no route out. It's just going to be full of clippers because that is the impact. And we've done it quite technically over here. That is the impact of the tzimtzumim and the parsois from Malchus Vatilis to Eileh Masbiyah. It's all well and fine when it's in the Eileh, when it's in the Eivin of Kedusha. Then there can still be bittul, right? But the reality is when you create the world in Midas Hadin, ha'aretz ha'isa toyu v'vayu v'cheshech, the world gets filled with gimel klips atmeis. So Eileh told us Hashamayim va'aretz Yemibar says Havaya Elikim Shitvim Mitzarachamim Poseles Rishonim. The Eibishter didn't create a world that was going to be exclusively full of klippos. Going to create a world that's going to have Eir and Kedusha, Torah and mitzvahs, etc. As well we elaborate. But we're only in the middle of this point. We're going to explain it a bit more with the Yereach. Yeah, and we'll carry on next time.